Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, September 14th. I'm Laura Kornfield, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Israel's 9th president, Shimon Peres, was this morning transferred to the intensive care unit at the Sheba Medical Center at Tel HaShomer after suffering a major stroke last night. Doctors say that he is currently in critical but stable condition and are set to issue another evaluation in the next hour. IBA's Efrat Batat has been following developments and brings us this roundup of events.
Mr. Peres this morning is stable, in a critical condition, but stable. We are moving him to the neurosurgical intensive care unit, and we are going to keep on the multidisciplinary evaluation by our expert teams. Later in the day, at about 4 p.m., we are going to make another evaluation, and we will update you then. Thank you.
Former President Shimon Peres was taken to hospital yesterday afternoon after experiencing chest pains that began during a lunch meeting. Initial blood tests revealed a chemical imbalance, and as the evening progressed, he said he was feeling more pain in the head. A CT scan taken around 8 p.m. confirmed serious internal bleeding in the brain, and it turned out that Peres actually suffered a stroke while in the hospital. The medical team of experts successfully managed to stop the hemorrhage, but due to the deterioration of his situation, doctors decided to place him on a respirator in an induced coma. Peres' son-in-law and personal physician said that when the sedation was lessened, Peres was indeed responsive.
The family of Mr. Peres is very appreciative of the excellent treatment he is given here at the Sheba Medical Center. We are very close to him, and we're happy to remark that when the sedation was a little lessened, he was very active. He responded to our appeals to him, and we'll keep very close to him during the day. And hopefully that next time when the sedation will be lessened, we hope again to be able to get in touch with him. Anyway, he's listening and he's understanding what's happening when the sedation is released. So we are hoping for the best.
As news of the stroke began to spread, dozens of journalists from local media outlets and around the world gathered outside the hospital to cover developments. Prayers and messages of support began pouring in from across the political spectrum, and thousands of people conveyed their personal wishes for a speedy recovery.
These are not easy days. However, I would like to take the opportunity and thank all of you that are sending us their concerns and love and prayers. We thank you very much. I know that my father did not care about anything as much as he cares about people, as much as he cares about Israel, the Jewish people and the people in Israel. And I will take this opportunity on his behalf to send all of you his love. We understand the concern, we understand that people are interested in his situation, and we promise to keep you updated as much as we can. I'm optimistic. I'm a great believer in my father. He's an unique person. And I pray with all my heart, together with my family, that things will improve from this point on.
Despite falling short of some of his political ambitions, the veteran statesman has been considered a key figure in the history of Israel and a towering leader in the often divided world of local politics. Having served in almost every position possible, he was also an architect of the Oslo Accords, which coincidentally were signed exactly 23 years ago on the 13th of September, the day he suffered the stroke. Among his many titles and superlatives, Peres is perhaps most known as an eternal optimist. Hopefully, some of that optimism will have a positive effect on his physical health. For IBA News, this is Efrat Batat.
Just hours before suffering a massive stroke, former President Shimon Peres posted a video clip on his Facebook page urging Israelis to purchase locally made products. For me, it's Israeli salad, our wonderful fruits, our excellent industry, and our developed high-tech sector. I am proud of Israeli industry, he said, urging the public to buy blue and white goods, adding, not just because it's more patriotic, it is also better. The former president went on to note that there are 350 foreign companies investing in Israel. Why did they come? Because Israeli products have an outstanding reputation. What is good for them is good for us. He then called on the public to give a like for Israeli-made products. Joining me now in the studio to discuss the condition of Shimon Peres is Professor Tom Bornstein, Director of the Neurological Division at Jerusalem Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. He's also the chairman of the Israeli Neurological Association. Professor Bornstein, thanks so much for joining us.
Good evening.
Firstly, Professor, how much of a factor is President Peres' age?
See, usually the age is a factor. I mean, the older you are, the prognosis might be less good than when you're a young person. However, I think that it's not the chronological age, it's biological age. And as we know, Peres was in a very good condition and his brain was very sharp. And I think that this, as long as the brain has not suffered before and is healthy, the likelihood that the brain will recover are much higher. Although it is a devastating, large hemorrhagic stroke, we hope that after the stabilization of the condition, the things may improve when the blood within the brain will reabsorb. And we hope to get to this stage when we start this rehabilitation process of the brain. The brain has the ability to recover, the brain has the plasticity, but currently the situation, as far as I understand, I'm not his treating physician, but as far as I understand, is severe, and we hope that he will get over the very acute stage within a few days, stable, and he'll survive this part, and then we'll think the next stage.
Professor, the speed in which he was treated, does this give him an advantage regarding his recovery?
With, stroke is actually has two categories. Most of the strokes, 85%, are actually blockage of an artery by a thrombus, by a clot. Only 15% of the strokes are due to bleeding, like Shimon Peres had, means hemorrhagic strokes. In this case, opposed to the what we call ischemic stroke, the clot that we have to rush in order to dissolve the clot within 4.5 hours by a special drug called TPA. In the hemorrhagic stroke, the factor of the time is important because you have to stabilize the situation, the blood pressure, the oxygenation of the blood, but there is no particular medicine that you can use in order to prevent expansion of the hemorrhage, or there is no particular surgery or neurosurgery procedure that can improve it. Surgery is usually reserved only for those cases that it's life-threatening, and then you have to operate in order to evacuate the hematoma and to decompress the intracranial pressure. But however, the fact that he has been transferred to the hospital immediately, stabilizing the blood pressure, stopping the other drugs that may be hazard for the hemorrhage is, of course, an advantage.
You said, of course, that we have to wait a few more days to see what's going to happen.
Correct.
But in the average patients, what are the chances of a full recovery, or would it be wiser to anticipate some sort of irreparable damage?
As far as I have not seen the pictures or the imaging, but the hemorrhage is large one, and therefore the chances that a lot of brain tissue has been damaged is probably will occur, and therefore the ability to brain to recover depends on the rehabilitation, very long rehabilitation. As far as I understand, it was in the right side of the brain, which means the left side of the body is affected, and we have to see. It is too early to say what will be the prognosis. Currently, they are fighting probably to get him to stay alive and stabilize.
Briefly, what are the warning signs of a stroke?
Usually a warning sign of a stroke is acute, means immediate, sudden onset of what we call focal neurological deficit, which means all of a sudden you have a facial droop, weakness of the arm, and you cannot speak.
All of those together?
All of those together, or either as a combination. All of a sudden you have an acute dizziness or vertigo, and then you see double vision for a few minutes, for 20 minutes to 10 minutes. This is what we call transient neurological deficit. These are warning signs. Sudden onset, all of a sudden, half of your body is numb. So these are the signs that people should be aware in order to rush to the hospital. And the main way to do it is by ambulances, not waiting to your daughter to come to pick you up and go to the hospital. Time is brain. And for instance, in Shaarei Tzedek, we are doing all these procedures in order to hesitate and facilitate the procedure within the emergency room in order to do everything fast. Time. Faster is better.
Dr. Natan Bornstein, Professor Natan Bornstein, Director of the Neurological Division at Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. We wish Mr. Peres
the best of health.
Best of health,
Of course, thank you. Israel and the United States are set to sign later today an unprecedented military aid package worth at least $38 billion over the next decade. IBA's Ariel Sullivan examines what's behind the agreement.
This is the single largest military assistance package ever made with any country in American history. Later this evening in Washington, a memorandum of understanding is to be signed by U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice and her Israeli counterpart Yaakov Nagel. The deal not only ensures U.S. commitment to Israel's security, but also Israel's semi-dependence on American weaponry.
It does cement Obama's claim to be a good friend of Israel, and the American-Israeli relationship is in good shape despite everything. 10 years, military aid, more or less accounting for inflation, keeping the same rate that's been had for the last 10 years, $38 billion spread over 10 years. That's a major commitment, and it'll allow Israel to maintain and to improve its military capability. On the other hand, it's not what the Netanyahu government, the Israeli government, had asked for, had expected in the wake of the Iran deal, which was supposed to, according to Obama, Israel is supposed to be compensated for the risks that are being taken with Iran getting all this money, most of which will probably, or all of which will go into terror and other military capabilities, building more ballistic missiles, perhaps again in 5 or 6 years resuming its nuclear program. All those things Israel needs to prepare for. We're not doing so well in space. That's one area where Israel needs to have a larger budget. Those things are not in the agreement.
The funding is for 2018 to 2028 and includes $4 billion more than the previous decade, most for supplemental missile defense aid. On the downside, from an Israeli perspective, the Americans insisted that 26% share of the aid currently allowed to be used for purchase of Israeli defense products be ended within the next 6 years, conditioning all of the money to be spent only in the United States.
It's a lot of money, and Israeli taxpayers would have to find a way. It's not just the amount of money, it's the close interaction with the high level of American technological military R&D capabilities. And it's a two-way street, and that's something that I think that the Israeli government, Netanyahu's tried to emphasize, needs to re-emphasize. This is a cooperative venture. The United States does provide this tremendous help for Israel. Israel produces technology, like the Iron Dome system, ballistic missile interception in a number of different areas, that the United States has not developed or succeeded with. So there's that close interaction, and in the long term, if we take out that connection between the Israeli military industry and the American military industry, through this process, this weaning off process, it may also hurt the United States' capability.
Some say that Israel could have won more from Washington had it waited until the next presidency. Others say more could have come had Netanyahu and Obama not been so much at odds. Jerusalem also gave in to an American demand not to seek any increase in aid over the next decade. Time will tell if this condition will indeed be kept. Aryeh O'Sullivan for IBA News.
Israel launched the OFEC 11 spy satellite yesterday afternoon, successfully putting it into orbit, but Defense Ministry officials say it may not be working properly. Technicians at the ground station in Yehud are trying to stabilize the intelligence satellite. Ofer Doron, head of the space division at Israel Aerospace Industries, said there were indications that some of the systems were not functioning properly and that the first hours were always crucial and nerve-wracking until they can get it operating properly. The satellite is designed to make about 800 photography sorties a year and joins the OFEC 10 launched 2 years ago, but also comes following the loss of Amos 6, an Israeli civilian communication satellite that was destroyed when its launcher blew up just 2 weeks ago. A tense calm prevails on both sides of Israel's northern border today after the Air Force once again struck Syrian armory artillery batteries near Khalat al-Jandal, a village in the foothills of the Hermon mountain. Last night's retaliatory response came shortly after 3 mortar shells exploded inside Israel in the northern Golan Heights. No injuries or damage were reported. IBA's Margot Dudkevich reports.
On the first day the US-Russian brokered ceasefire took hold in Syria, 3 mortar shells exploded inside Israel in the northern Golan Heights, yesterday afternoon and early evening. The 4th such incident since the weekend, the 7th in the past week. In a sharply worded statement, the army warned it will not hesitate to act against opposition forces inside Syria if the mortar fire continues, emphasizing that while it holds the Syrian regime responsible, it will not tolerate any attempt to harm Israel's sovereignty and the security of its citizens. The Air Force's retaliatory response was the second in 24 hours, after it targeted Syrian artillery batteries before dawn yesterday in response to mortar fire in Israel shortly after midnight Monday. Yesterday afternoon, the army sealed off a section of the Road 98 in the north, fearing the situation may pose a threat to motorists. Some military officials believe yesterday's mortar fire may have been intentional, a possible attempt to draw the Jewish state into conflict. However, Israeli military expert Kobi Marom doubts the events will lead to an escalation in the north.
I don't think we're going to see an escalation, but that's a result of the backing and the support that the Russians and the Iranians give to the Assad regime. And what we had lately, we have battles on the border that sometimes cross the border to Israel. Some of the ammunitions cross the border to the Israeli territory. That's why Israel responds again and again. I don't think the incident that we had last night is going to change dramatically the situation.
The Lebanese Al Mayadin news agency affiliated with Hezbollah said the Syrian government yesterday submitted a letter to the United Nations, protesting what it called Israel's aggression, demanding that action be taken against the Jewish state. Commenting on the situation in the Golan Heights, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov urged Israel to show restraint and avoid provocation in the Golan Heights. In the Quneitra area inside Syria, regime forces intensified their attacks on the rebels. Referring to the recent upsurge in mortar fire, some Israelis living in communities close to the northern border question why the army continues to relate to the incidents as a spillover from the war in Syria, saying it should be viewed as an outright assault on the Jewish state. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
The Syrian ceasefire brokered by the U.S. and Russia appears to be holding, with reports of sporadic fire in some areas. Damascus and central Syria were said to be calm. However, fighting was reported in Harasta and the Quneitra area. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said so far it has not received a single report of civilians or combatants killed. The United Nations yesterday described the situation as dramatically improving, saying they were preparing to send humanitarian aid into the war-torn country soon.
In a conflict of 5 years with so many fighting and moving parts, could then move further into making the cessation of hostilities very fragile. So avoiding any type of snowball effect of any incident. Second, the issue, which has always been the case, but even more so now that has been clearly specified, is how the disengagement between the armed opposition groups from al-Nusra will take place within a week. That's quite a challenge, and we will have to watch that very carefully.
So we have seen, as I said, some reports of sporadic violence, but thus far the arrangement as a whole seems to be holding, and the violence, God bless you, is lower in comparison to previous days and weeks. But as I said, we anticipated an uneven start to the cessation of hostilities.
Hamas rejected 2 deals offered by Israel in order to facilitate the return of the remains of the 2 soldiers, Lieutenant Hadar Goldin and Staff Sergeant Oron Shaul, killed in action in Operation Protective Edge in 2014, and the 2 Israeli civilians, Avera Mengistu, who crossed into Gaza 2 years ago, and Hisham Sayed, a Bedouin who entered Gaza just a year later. The details were revealed by Reservist Colonel Lior Lotan, the Prime Minister's liaison responsible for prisoners and missing soldiers, who spoke at the terrorism conference yesterday at the Herzliya Interdisciplinary Center. According to Lotan, Israel proposed to release 18 Palestinian prisoners and the remains of 19 others held by Israel in exchange for Goldin and Shaul's bodies. In addition, he said Israel offered to release dozens of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel in exchange for the return of Mengistu and Hisham. Hamas, he said, rejected the proposals in an unprecedented way. Israel and the Palestinian Authority signed an agreement that will resolve the Palestinians' outstanding debt to the Israel Electric Corporation. Attending the signing were Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon, Palestinian Minister of Civil Affairs Hussein al-Sheikh, and Major General Yoav Mordechai, head of the Coordination of Government Activities. Under the agreement, the PA will pay Israel some 570 million shekels of the 2 billion shekel debt, and the balance of 1.5 billion shekels will be paid in installments, and part of the debt will be erased. The sides agreed to form a joint Israeli-Palestinian committee to oversee the transfer of responsibility to the PA of power lines supplying electricity to West Bank cities and the setting up of a mechanism for collecting payment. The state is opposed to demolishing the homes of the Jewish murderers of 16-year-old Muhammad Abu Khader, who 2 years ago was abducted, badly beaten, and burned alive in the Jerusalem forest. This according to the response filed by the state at the Supreme Court this morning in answer to a petition filed by his parents last month demanding that the homes of their son's killers be destroyed. The state maintained that the fact that Abu Khader's killers were sentenced serves as a deterrence. Earlier this year, the Jerusalem District Court sentenced Yosef Chaim ben David for being the ringleader in the murder to life in prison plus 20 years, along with 2 other Jewish minors who were also handed down life sentences plus 21 years, respectively. A disappointment for Israel in the Rio Paralympic Games as local athletes Itai Ehrenlib and Shraga Weinberg missed the bronze medal in the men's quad doubles wheelchair tennis after being beaten 3-6, 6-4, 7-6 by Britain's Andy Lapham and Jamie Burdekin. The duo didn't make it easy for the British win. The grueling encounter was the longest tennis match in Paralympic history at 4 hours and 25 minutes. The game was played in 35 degrees Celsius heat, and a half-hour break was needed after the second set. The 50-year-old Weinberg holds 2 Olympic medals already, a bronze in 2012 and a silver from 2008, and his hopes of bringing home a third was smashed in the competition. In local money matters, shares were mixed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, while the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading. Here are the numbers. Turning to the weather, and the forecast is calling for a slight rise in temperatures tomorrow. Here are the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Please join us again tomorrow, same time, same channel, when Ari O'Sullivan will be back at this desk. I'm Laura Cornfield, wishing you a good evening, and shalom from Jerusalem.